Welcome to Amazing Places. Today I will show you the astounding decline of Detroit. This is Hazlitt Street in the city of Detroit in the United States of America. And Hazlitt Street looks like it is located in some kind of an average lower income to middle income American neighborhood. The street looks to be in a fairly decent condition. The houses appear to be in an acceptable condition as well. There are cars parked in front of the houses, and the front yards seem to be decently maintained, and there is not much trash on the streets, which are all pretty good signs. Now, if we zoom in to a specific house, that image can be kind of sustained. The house is not the best house in the street. We can see there is some repairs needed in the woodwork, like in this spot and in this spot. But the steps on both sides of the building seem to be in a decent shape. All of the windows appear to be intact. Both the front doors have a nice shiny metal doorknob. There isn't really trash lying around on the porch. We can see two plastic garden chairs right next to the front door, suggesting that people like to sit there and relax a bit. At first sight, this appears to be a relatively nice and quiet place to live. So, not much strange going on here, unless we have a look at the neighbor's house, because then the image will become drastically different. There it is, the house next door. Let's have a look at that. Now it looks as if we're in some kind of slum. This house is completely abandoned, probably years ago. Only a few windows are still intact. A lot of glass has been broken and some of the window frames have disappeared. Mind you, window frames are not blown away by the wind, and they don't have legs, so these window frames were probably stolen. The gutters have disappeared as well, probably stolen because of the value of the metal parts. Now let's zoom out and have a look at the data that this Google Street View image provides us. You see, I've been tricking you a bit. This is not a recent picture. This is a picture taken in 2009. Now Google Street View allows us to travel back in time, as it were. So let's have a look at what happened to these two houses over a time span of 10 years. So again, this was the situation in 2009. The house on the left being completely abandoned and probably looted. The house on the right still seems to be occupied and in kind of a decent shape. And when we turn around, we see that the other side of the street still looks kind of decent. However, the signs of decline are already there. There is a for rent sign. There is some littering on the street, and one of these cars obviously is a car wreck. But the street is alive. People are living here, and in their own way, they still put some kind of effort in keeping their street livable. Let's turn around and focus on the two houses again. The abandoned house on the left and the house on the right that still appears to be occupied. So, now let's time travel 2 years forward to 2011. The situation has changed dramatically. The house on the left now has been totally destroyed by fire. Was it hit by lightning? Maybe. Was it set on fire by vandals? Who knows? But the house on the right is now abandoned as well. No wonder, because if the house of the neighbors burns down to the ground, you start thinking, am I next? So the occupants of the house on the right have abandoned their home as well. And that house is now completely boarded up to prevent illegal trespassing for what it's worth. Because will vandals and thieves really be prevented from entering because of a few poorly fastened slabs of wood? I wonder. And if vandals or thieves do illegally enter this property, how many people in this street are prepared and capable to intervene or call the cops in time? So that tells us already that the future of the house on the right is not looking very bright. So let's again jump 2 years ahead in time to 2013. Here we can see another dramatic change. The house on the left has now completely disappeared. It was probably demolished to prevent the remains of the house to become even more of a danger to its surroundings. The house on the right is no longer boarded up. Apparently, even these cheap slabs of wood are not even safe from thieves As we can see, the ground floor of the house is now overgrown with bushes and small trees. But perhaps the most remarkable feature of this situation is the children in front of the house. They seem to be playing in the front yard. Now my question would be, what is to stop these children from going inside the house? It's fully open, it's fully accessible. Now, an abandoned house is not just a shell of brick and wood. It could be deadly dangerous inside. Wooden floors and staircases could be rotten or have holes in them, causing those who enter the premises to fall and break their legs, or even worse. There could be razor-sharp pieces of metal or shards of glass inside. Roofs and walls could collapse. Perhaps there are electrical wires that are still connected. Perhaps chemical waste has been dumped inside. Or perhaps a homeless person took shelter in this abandoned ruin, or maybe the place is used by gangs to stash illegal items. Abandoned buildings often are just extremely dangerous places to enter, especially for children. So it always astounds me that places like these are just left fully open and fully accessible to playing children. Why aren't authorities making sure that ruins like these are either fully closed or demolished? So let's move on another few years to 2018, and we can see another dramatic change. The house on the right is now burned down to the ground as well. There is almost nothing left of it. And even after all these years, this ruin is still fully accessible and still is a danger to anyone going inside. Now, finally, let's jump 1 year ahead to 2019. The house looks kind of the same as 1 year earlier. The dramatic change we can observe now is what happened to the rest of the street. If we turn around, we can see that about the whole street has turned into a wasteland. Look at this, no more doors, fully overgrown. And again, these are the same houses 10 years earlier in 2009. They were pretty decent looking houses in 2009, but the signs of decline were already there. And 10 years later, they have turned into ruins. This is what urban decline does to a community. Once the first signs are there, and if homeowners, authorities and local businesses do not attempt to stop this process, it's likely to go from bad to worse. And at some point in time there's no going back, and the entire neighborhood, if not the entire city, will fall apart. Now of course one could say that this is just one example. And this one example does not prove much about the rest of Detroit. Well then, let's have a look at the rest of Detroit in order to get a better idea of the vast scale of the decline in Detroit. Go to Google Maps, type Detroit, switch to satellite mode, and then zoom in a bit to the level in which you can see a few hundred city blocks on your screen. Note how green Detroit looks. Isn't that amazing? They always told you Detroit was one big ghetto, and then you observe Detroit in Google Maps, and then it appears to be nice, luscious and green, as if they have huge gardens and little parks everywhere. Well, dream on. What you see, all those hundreds of green areas surrounding the houses, are the places where they demolished the houses that were set on fire or that just collapsed after being neglected for 30 years. The green parts are the worst parts. They are the parts where sometimes only 1 or 2 residents per street are remaining. They are the last poor souls who cannot afford to leave this urban hell on earth. Their residential areas have turned into urban wastelands with vast grasslands often overgrown by bushes and often used as illegal waste dumps. Roads are no longer maintained. The police barely shows any presence. How do I know? Well, the images of Google Street View prove it. You can hardly find any police car in these urban wastelands of Detroit. I don't know who is ruling the streets here, but I can't imagine it's the police. Now, if you zoom out again, you can see that these urban wastelands are not just in a specific area in the city. No, significant parts of the city have turned into huge urban wastelands. Now let's jump down from satellite view to Google Street View again. So again, we are in central Detroit. This once was one of the richest and one of the largest cities in America. In the first half of the 20th century, Detroit became the car manufacturing capital of the United States and the world. What you're looking at right now are the remains of what once was the Packard automotive plant. In its heydays, it was the most modern automotive plant in the world. and it provided no less than 40,000 workers with a job. But it has been closed down for more than 60 years now. No one wants to have it. No one wants to redevelop it. And there is no money to demolish it. So now it's nothing more than a freely accessible pile of polluted and contaminated rubble, a refuge for those who walk the edge of society, and a public health hazard to anyone who enters the premises. Where did it all go wrong? How could Detroit transform so rapidly from being one of the strongest engines of the world economy into the most declined city in the Western Hemisphere? By 1950, Detroit had grown to a peak population of about 1.8 million people. But as of the 1950s, Detroit began to deteriorate. Today, the population of Detroit is only 640,000. That's 1/3 of its peak. Most of this is caused by mismanagement. The local leadership failed to protect black Americans, many of whom were victim to brutal discrimination, resulting in violent and costly riots. Local car manufacturers failed to innovate and cut their costs in order to remain competitive. As a response to growing competition from Asian and European car makers, the local leadership failed to provide good public services, like maintenance of roads and public transport. The local leadership also failed to manage the urban design of its city. This and more problems, all leading to most of the car-related business in Detroit to leave the city or simply close down to never reopen again, followed by a mass exodus of the people of Detroit. Between 1950 and today, out of 1.8 million people, 1.2 million left the city. Those who had the opportunity moved away from Detroit, leaving behind exactly those people who were hit the hardest by the complete failure of the local government. But it got even worse. Local politicians did not only create this crisis, they also ignored it. For decades, they allowed complete city districts to fall into decline. Thousands of businesses were terminated, thousands of homes were abandoned, and eventually looted and burned down to the ground by local gangs, who filled the void that was created by failed management. In 2013, Detroit even became the largest American city ever to file for bankruptcy. Even until very recently, not much has changed in Detroit, as is proven by these recent images from Google Street View. Taking a tour through Detroit in Google Street View feels like being stuck in a post-apocalyptic science fiction movie, as if all man have left the planet, and only a few ruins are all that is left of human civilization. As I showed before, Google Street View allows us to do something that comes close to traveling back in time and study how cities changed over the years. Street View shows in a very confronting way that perfectly normal streets totally transform into urban wastelands in a matter of 10 to 20 years. For all of those years, the local government could have intervened and improved its policies in order to save its own city and its own people. But they didn't do enough, resulting in large parts of the city completely rotting away. And although we cannot blame the current local politicians of Detroit for what happened way before they got into office, we must establish that the decline of Detroit appears to be far beyond the perspective of recovery. It is hard to imagine that there is any coming back from this. It might just be that eventually Detroit will die as a city. Perhaps one day no one will be left here. A once glorious American city will be reduced to a small and insignificant town. And if that is not bad enough as it is, it seems that Detroit is just the front runner of a new normal for many cities in the United States of America. For the past decades, Americans from all over the country have seen Detroit falling into decline, thinking it was a rarity caused by unique circumstances that only applied to those poor people of Detroit. But no, by now anyone can see that this model of urban decline is now popping up everywhere in America, be it in Chicago, Baltimore, Los Angeles, St. Louis or New Orleans. Everywhere, homes are being abandoned by the thousands. Communities are falling apart and residential neighborhoods are turning into urban wastelands. It's a sign of the times. It's a crystal clear and real-life demonstration of the fading power of American cities. And by the looks of it, judging from the timelines that anyone can see in Google Street View, this is far from over. If this process will continue for another few decades, huge parts of most American cities will become unlivable. Cities are the source of growth and innovation. If you let your cities rot away, you destroy that potential for growth and innovation. Is there still time to reverse this process? Maybe. Do we see the current American administration showing a profound vision on how to deal with this problem? Maybe. Throughout history, declining cities have marked fading superpowers. It happened to the Romans, the Greek, and the Egyptians. They were the superpowers of their eras. But much like America, they lived the good life without paying for it. They expanded their global influence, but neglected their people and their cities. When cities decline, empires fall. In Detroit, we might be witnessing the beginning of the final stage of a superpower. Or maybe not. Maybe American ingenuity, creativity, innovation and hard work will prevail and lead the world into a next century of American world domination. That is hard to tell, judging from their declining cities alone. But what we do see for the past decades is an unprecedented decline of American cities. And the least that should cause is great worry among American leadership. But I don't see that yet. What I do see is ever more American cities falling into different kinds of decline, be it thousands of homes being abandoned, as we see in Detroit, thousands of people living in tents on the streets, as we see in Los Angeles, or city centers turning into out-of-control open-air substance markets, like we see in Philadelphia. If the American leadership wants to turn the tide, they need to come up with some kind of strategy that involves not only a budget of many billions of dollars, but they also need to drastically change their thinking and their political system in order to stop more cities from falling apart.